something has to be up and something has to be down. Something has to be positive and something has to be negative when you're dealing with reinforcement learning.
Kristen Ruby, social media tech analyst and CEO of Ruby Media Group, is on the front lines exposing how big tech is already using artificial intelligence to censor speech online. On this week's episode of CensorTrack with Paiten, I sat down with Ruby to discuss artificial intelligence and its impact on free speech online. I want to get to the Ruby files and AI, but first I would like to just set a foundation. So the term artificial intelligence has kind of been thrown around a lot lately. Can you just give us an explanation on what exactly is artificial intelligence?
Sure. So artificial intelligence is basically a series of different systems that can be used to automate what would traditionally be manual process to actual automation to do those things using technology.
While I've been researching for this, I've also noticed things like machine learning and natural language processing. So how do those relate to artificial intelligence, and are they the same or are they different?
So they're different, and I would say natural language processing was definitely a core focus on my research that I did with the Ruby files to see how natural language processing, or NLP, was used to moderate or perhaps possibly censor speech.
You've conducted extensive investigations, especially on Twitter, where you said you discovered how the left uses artificial intelligence and data science to create algorithmic political bias and weaponized language. So you've called these reports the Ruby files. Can you tell me what you found?
Sure, yeah. So in my reporting and research, I looked at a subset or a sample data set that was an internal Twitter document that someone who previously worked there gave me. And there were many documents actually, but what I'm able to do is look at the data set for political misinformation. And then with that, you can see what words were flagged as detections and arrays for algorithmic review, manual, or to go to a human to look at that content again. And what's really interesting about that research is that in order for that data set to have a quality, the very definition of misinformation or information has to be equal on both the left and the right. So what I'm seeing in that data set is that there is really no content for misinformation on the left, which means that that's entirely skewed. If you have every example, if that data set is only trained on misinformation on the right, it will keep picking that up, and that can also possibly create what someone called a recursive bias in that training. If it's not actually fixed, that's a problem moving forward.
That's so interesting. So can you walk me through an example? So would it be someone posts something about, say, the elections on Twitter, and if they have a specific keyword, is it then immediately flagged and taken down? Am I understanding that correctly?
So basically, it's a series of different words. None of them are a specific banned word list per se, but what they said is that we look at this, we score each tweet, we give it, I believe the threshold was 290. So you can see the tweet, the words that were detected, the arrays, and then the score on the left. And then you can see if it was a violation or if it was ultimately a non-violation after someone reviewed it. But it's a little bit different than a traditional banned word list, because with a banned word list, that would be you use the word and that's it, it was flagged. This, they said it had to do with context and correlation, and also the entities of the different words. So if you're using a bunch of words that someone has determined all of these words are already misinformation, and let's say you're using 10 or 20 of them, then that's going to impact that algorithmic score that they are giving to that tweet, and then they make the decision on that.
Oh, interesting. So what are the dangers of using AI to moderate content?
So here's the thing. On the one hand, I understand why people want to leverage machine learning to moderate content, because you have so many tweets per second, and the sheer volume of content, you need to add in some form of machine learning, right? So on the one hand, that could be positive. However, to answer your question, the danger is if that training it is biased from the beginning with built-in political bias, well, then you could be wiping out entire conversations from ever even happening. And what's really interesting is that if you look at some of the hearings that are going on right now, they're almost prehistoric. They don't really take into account how most social media content is really automated now with machine learning for these takedowns. Most takedowns are done with machine learning. So when you're actually looking at, oh, this person said to another person, I want you to ban them, and then there's this email back and forth, that is not actually representative of how machine learning is being used. That is an antiquated process that is not being used on speech for most people in this country. So what that does is it actually does a real disservice to people to think that someone is sitting there really thinking about their account in that way. That's just not happening, right? What's happening and what you can see with these, thousands and thousands of rows of tweets is that all of this is being automated.
So how can you explain how is AI being used in other platforms? Is the process you're finding with Twitter, is that something that's happening in other social media platforms as well?
Yeah. So one of the things that also sparked my interest in this is that previously with on Facebook, before any of this started with Twitter, I think, by the way, that Facebook is an example of using AI to over optimize. So we have with Twitter, their AI could be called, or Elon Musk called it primitive. So he wants to do a lot more to change it. I believe he believes it's primitive compared to the other AI he uses at his other companies. However, if you look at that and compare it to Facebook, Facebook over optimizes with AI, and that poses other challenges. So here's the example of that. My company has the federal trademark with the USPTO for Ruby Media Group. And I noticed that another company had created a page with my same name and started posting spam content. So I went through the proper channels. I reported it through their online forum, and had to include an example of my page and the offending content, the infringing content. Well, within seconds, I received a notification back that my own company was infringing on my own mark that I'm the owner of, which of course made no sense to me. All of that was AI driven. And then within seconds, Facebook deleted my business of 15 years. Okay, so this is an example of the very real danger of what happens when AI gets it wrong and when there's not a human in the loop. Okay, and in order to get my business back, I mean, it was the most frustrating process, and basically numerous attorney generals had to get involved. I had to file a consumer complaint with, I think, 3 different attorney generals. And you'll see there's actually, once I started digging into this, there was an entire Reddit thread on this very topic. So this is an example where once AI gets that wrong, they make the wrong call, that can be devastating for a business. If there's not a human in the loop to fix that, which there wasn't, I kept getting bounced back and forth from machine to machine to machine because for all of those appeals.
So I'm interested on your thoughts. Since AI is trained by humans and humans innately have biases, do you think it's possible to have an AI that is neutral, or are we always going to have this problem of having some sort of bias within an algorithm or AI?
Well, so the source that I interviewed said that it's a mistake to think that AI will ever be neutral. I thought that was a really interesting statement. And one of the things that I found fascinating about the research and the way that I did it with them is that was basically 2 months of my life. Like I was like a series of questions and interviews, and I was like putting in 20 hours a day over 2 months. So I feel like I'm grateful for this tremendous, training and real gift of knowledge in this process. But something has to be up and something has to be down. Something has to be positive and something has to be negative when you're dealing with reinforcement learning. And so I think that's really important for everyone to understand. And to answer your question, no, I don't know that if you're training something, you're saying, okay, well, I'm going to label all of this as X. And then if that's X, then this is going to be Y. So no matter what, I believe that someone somewhere is going to say, hey, I disagree with your labeling decisions on this group, right? And so all of this is sort of going on in the background. It's the less sexy part of AI that no one talks about, but it's actually probably a really important part. The other thing that's interesting is that people don't really understand how they are being used in training data sets. And this also poses a real question. We see artists fighting back right now when it comes to alleged copyright infringement that they are saying is happening on their work. Well, we haven't seen writers fight back as much. And a perfect example of that is, are writers going to be less confident or less likely to post their writing, knowing that that writing can be ripped and used in a training data set. And so a perfect example is, let's say I've written on cancel culture, which I have extensively. When I ask AI to write an article now on cancel culture, what happens is I start to recognize my own writing that's coming back to me, which is a really not great feeling, right? Because you lose this. What is the point of doing or even the research I just did of this article? It's 30,000 words at this point. So if someone then uses my work in a training data set, that means that anyone who is asking that AI to write about that topic can now be spitting back my own work to me without there really being any sort of, compensation isn't the right word, but even just the entire process of copyright is about to go out the window. And I think they're really struggling with what to do. The other thing that I really want to point out is the role of academic researchers in all of this. And this was the most startling thing that I discovered over and over and over again when I said, who created those word lists? What I was told was academic researchers. We worked with academic researchers who then told trust and safety, who then told the data scientists, and that's how that whole process or line of command worked. Problem that I'm now starting to see is that those same disinfo academic researchers for social media have now moved over to doing research for AI. And the recommendations that they're making are not really recommendations. They're policy disguised as recommendations. And so we have a real issue right now at the highest levels of institutional academia in the United States, which is somewhat being corrupted with a very small percentage of people who call themselves social media disinfo researchers. But what they do is they misuse the title of academic research to take out and smear anyone that they don't want to be allowed to talk. I mean, they outright defame them in these reports. They add them to lists, which I think some of those people who are added to those lists would actually have somewhat of a legal case against them, because I've never seen academic research like this in my entire life. I mean, this is not really what academic research was ever supposed to be about, right? It was supposed to be about data, looking at the data, making sound recommendations. It's not supposed to be weaponized by activists.
Looking forward, where should we go from here? It doesn't seem like AI is going away anytime soon. So how can we protect free speech online in a world of AI?
That's a great question. And I think that this idea of machine learning fairness or responsible machine learning initiatives, a lot of that is being weaponized, again, by a combination of quote-unquote activists who've taken over academic research. And some of those academic researchers are receiving federal grants from the government to do this research. Some of those same people are now also working full-time in data science along with those institutions to do that research. This is a conflict of interest. We need clear disclosures for people who are working in big tech that, hey, if the administration, whether it is a left-leaning or a right-leaning administration, to me, it doesn't matter. The point is, it's a conflict of interest either way, because that is without those disclosures, it's called double dipping, right? And so that's what's going on. And that's also a data privacy concern. So that's one part of this. We also need people who are checking the work of these people. What's going on right now is we're empowering people at the highest level, some of the most important roles in American society, under this guise of machine learning fairness. And a lot of times, actually, what they're doing and what I've discovered in my research is that there is no fairness in anything they're doing, but no one knows enough to check their work. So that's a real problem, especially when you're talking about quote unquote social media censorship. It's not this person emailed another person to get the person banned. Like, to me, that just shows how completely far removed the people who are holding these congressional hearings are from how the majority of the censorship work is being done. So I also think that we really need to educate congressional leaders, and they need to bring in more experts who can provide domain expertise to ask the right questions, to send them in the right direction. The training is just so antiquated, and they need to know what to look for. Because if they don't know what to look for, they can never truly do a proper investigation. And what that means is that this is going to keep happening over and over and over again. That's why I say ultimately, this story isn't just about Twitter that I discovered in the Ruby files. This is a mass story that's happening probably at every single social media platform. And we just, I happen to have files from Twitter. If I had the Google files, if I had Facebook files or Reddit files, my guess is I'd start to see similar things buried in those n-gram lists and in natural language processing. So going back to your original question, we need to check these people. We can't just assume that because they say it's fair, that it is fair. We can't just assume that because they're saying we're going to make ML that has no bias, that statement is correct, right? What they're really doing is creating ML that's seeded with their own political bias, but no one knows enough or is putting enough resources in to check that. Someone has to check the people who are responsible for fairness. If you don't check the people responsible for fairness or bias or no bias in data sets, you could tip the scales of an election and never even know it. That is a serious threat to the future of America.
Thank you so much. This has all been so interesting, and I really appreciate all of the research that you've done to expose all of this and bring this to light. Is there anything that I didn't touch on that you would like to mention?
Yeah, I would just say if people want to read the article that I wrote is on my website, rubymediagroup.com, and it's Twitter Artificial Intelligence. I also have tweeted a lot of data on Twitter, for my handle is @sparklingruby. So you can see I continue to share more data from that data set on there. And the more I discover, the more I will continue to share. So I really appreciate you bringing attention to this extremely important topic.